Hello, my name is Richard Young and I'm a historian. Recently, I invented a new form of video conferencing technology. Thanks to the emergence of powerful new AIs, it's now possible to have video conference calls with a variety of historical figures from all across the globe. Scheduling, even with time travel, is something of a difficulty still, but I've managed to put together a debate for your enjoyment. Arguing for the motion that the use of nuclear weapons against Japan was justified, we have the 33rd President of the United States of America, Harry S. Truman. Mr. Truman authorized the use of atomic weapons on Japan in 1945. Arguing against the motion, we have Robert J. Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is well known for his work in the development of the first atomic weapons. President Truman, you're welcome to begin.
Thank you, Richard. Ladies and gentlemen, the decision to employ atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was not taken lightly, but it was a necessary step to bring World War II to a swift end. The invasion of Japan would have resulted in catastrophic casualties on both sides, including American troops and Japanese civilians. The dropping of the atomic bombs aimed to avoid a prolonged and costly conflict, ultimately saving lives and hastening the Japanese surrender. It was a difficult choice, but one made with the best interests of both nations in mind.
Thank you, Mr. Truman, for your opening statement. Mr. Oppenheimer, the floor is yours for your opening statement.
Thank you, Richard. Ladies and gentlemen, while I understand the immense pressure faced by President Truman during those times, I must express my reservations about the use of atomic weapons on Japanese civilians. The destructive power of these bombs is unparalleled, and it led to the deaths of over 200,000 people, most of whom were innocent civilians. There were alternatives available, such as continuing the conventional bombings or exploring diplomatic solutions, which might have achieved the same result without resorting to such devastating means.
Thank you, Mr. Oppenheimer, for sharing your perspective. Now let's move on to the main discussion. Mr. Truman, how do you respond to concerns raised by Mr. Oppenheimer about the loss of civilian lives?
It is essential to remember the context of the times. World War II was an unprecedented global conflict that had already cost millions of lives. The Japanese military and government at that time showed an unwavering resolve and reluctance to surrender unconditionally. Given this situation, the use of atomic weapons was seen as the most expedient way to compel the Japanese leadership to surrender and prevent further loss of life in the long run. I regret the loss of civilian lives, but I stand by my decision, knowing it was made to end the war and save more lives overall.
Mr. Oppenheimer, how do you counter the argument that atomic bombings were necessary to end the war quickly and save lives?
While I understand the pressure President Truman faced to bring the war to an end, I believe we must critically evaluate the long-term consequences of such actions. The use of atomic weapons set a dangerous precedent, ushering in an era of nuclear arms race and proliferation. Additionally, the bombings had profound humanitarian consequences, causing unimaginable suffering to innocent civilians. There were alternatives, such as exploring diplomatic channels or offering clearer terms for surrender, which might have achieved the same result without resorting to such destruction.
Mr. Truman, it's been argued that Japan was already close to surrender before the atomic bombings. How do you respond to this claim?
It is true that there were discussions within the Japanese government about the possibility of surrender, but it is also crucial to recognize that surrender negotiations were complicated by factions within the Japanese leadership who advocated for continuing the fight. The decision to use atomic weapons was made to remove any doubt about the seriousness of our intent to bring an end to the war. It was a difficult judgment call, but the bombings did prompt the Japanese emperor to intervene and order the surrender, finally bringing the war to a close.
Mr. Oppenheimer, how do you counter the argument that the bombings pushed Japan to surrender and avoided the need for a full-scale invasion, potentially saving many lives in the process?
The historical evidence on the effects of the bombings on Japan's surrender is complex and open to interpretation. While the bombings may have played a role, it is important to note that the Soviet Union's entry into the war against Japan also had a significant impact on their decision to surrender. Moreover, there is no certainty that a full-scale invasion of Japan would have been the only alternative. Continuing conventional bombings, offering more lenient surrender terms, or continuing diplomatic efforts could have been explored further. The bombings had far-reaching implications beyond the immediate end of the war, and we should consider those consequences as well.
Thank you both for presenting your arguments. We're now approaching the end of our debate, and you'll each be given a minute to give your closing statements, starting with Mr. Truman.
Thank you, Richard. Ladies and gentlemen, the decision to use atomic weapons was one of the most difficult I had to make during my presidency. As President of the United States, I bore the responsibility for the well-being of my citizens and the world at large. The bombings were made with the belief that it would hasten the end of a brutal war, saving both American and Japanese lives. I understand and respect the concerns raised by Mr. Oppenheimer, but I stand by my decision as one made in the best interest of our nation and to secure a lasting peace.
Thank you, Mr. Truman. Mr. Oppenheimer, your closing statement, please.
Thank you, Richard. Ladies and gentlemen, my reservations about the use of atomic weapons on civilians stem from my profound concern for the ethical implications of such actions. While I understand the difficult choices faced by President Truman during that time, I believe it is essential for us to learn from history and recognize the far-reaching consequences of our decisions. The atomic bombings not only caused immense suffering, but also altered the course of international relations. As we move forward, we must prioritize diplomacy, arms control, and peaceful resolutions to conflicts to prevent such devastation from ever happening again.
Thank you, Mr. Oppenheimer. That concludes our debate. I would like to express my gratitude to both Mr. Truman and Mr. Oppenheimer for engaging in this thought-provoking discussion. Remember that history has often been shaped by difficult decisions, and it's essential that we learn from the past as we strive for a better future. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. We'll have more videos like this coming out soon.